Hi guys, and welcome back to another true crime and makeup time video. If you're new here, my name is Zara and I post a new true crime video every single week. So if you enjoy these videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss another upload. Okay, so I came across today's case just as I was finishing up the Arushi Talwar case, and I ended up just going deep into Indian true crime. This case took place in Goa and it just caught my eye because I'm familiar with the area. Scarlett was a young girl on vacation in a foreign country with her family. You never really think anything bad is going to happen while on vacation, especially when there's sun, sand, adventures, and friendly locals. But in this case, something bad did happen. And the botched police investigation that followed, as well as just the culture of the local area, really added to this tragic situation. Let's get into it. Scarlett Keeling was born in July 1992 to her mother, Fiona, and her father, Richard Keeling. So her mother, Fiona, has 9 children to 5 different men, none of whom ever played a day-to-day role in any of their upbringing. Fiona was a single mom, and her family of 10 mainly survived from state benefits and were homeschooled. They lived in an area called Bradworthy in Devon, England, on a small, run-down piece of land in a small home with multiple trailers. So first, let's go through all 9 kids. So Fiona's first 3 children and all their ages as of the year 2008 were as follows. So her firstborn was a boy and his name was Halloran and he was 19 years old. Then came Silas, he was 17, and then came Scarlett, and she was 15. All of these 3 kids were fathered by Richard Keeling. He was a Libyan-born concrete contractor, and they lived at many addresses in Hertfordshire, but split up shortly after Scarlett was born. The next 2 children were Merlin, 13, and Kiss, 12, and they were born within 14 months of each other, and Merlin's father is market trader Chris Osborne, and Kiss's father's identity was left blank on her birth certificate. Next came Isis, who was 10, and Kincaid, who was 9. And they were fathered by Paul Schreck, and he was a market trader as well. And he met Fiona in Camden Market in London. She was selling army surplus gear and he was selling Moroccan pottery, and they just had a very brief relationship. But it was with Paul that she moved to this area in Devon and lived on this somewhat rural property, as they wanted to move all the children away from modern temptations. After they moved to Devon, her relationship with Paul soon ended, but not before they were evicted from a rental property because they didn't pay rent. And this already huge family then had to temporarily live in a bus. So after this, 2 more children came along, Trinity Willow, 6, and Aurora Lupe, 5. And they were both fathered by a man named Adam Foster. He was a floor layer, and this relationship too ended pretty quickly. And that makes 9. Fiona mainly homeschooled all the kids, but they did at times dip in and out of public schools. Neighbors said that the children were polite and clean, and the family caused no problems. But as one can imagine, raising 9 children alone is no easy task, and keeping them all out of trouble at one point or another would become an issue. But as one can imagine, raising 9 kids alone is no easy task, and as time would move along, keeping all of them out of trouble would become an issue. Fiona raised her kids to avoid drugs and alcohol, but depending on the company they kept, the area they lived in, the people that surrounded them, they didn't always follow this advice. As the older kids reached their teen years, they experimented with both. Scarlett was known to smoke weed. Although Fiona believed it to only be a couple times, friends would say that was not the case. That Skaz, as they knew her, would go out a lot. She would attend a lot of raves. She would get drunk and stoned a lot. Her older brother, Silas, was similar. He would always be out with his friends at parties and drinking. Fiona trusted her kids. She was very chill in her approach to parenting. She was more like a friend than a parent, and it is claimed that this is where the problems arose for many of the kids. Scarlett had a boyfriend and was sexually active, and Fiona only found out about this when Scarlett went to a free clinic to get birth control. But Fiona was okay with this and she was aware of the relationship. So she really was a very laid back mom because Scarlett would have only been like 14, 15 around this time. Scarlett, although she had a view that she was much more grown up than she was, according to her mom, she was a happy, lively girl who would sing at the top of her lungs. She played the sax and wanted to join a band. She loved horses and swimming. She was an active, strong, and healthy young girl. By the year 2008, Fiona now had a new boyfriend and his name was Rob Clark. So in November of 2008, Rob and Fiona decided to take the family on a long vacation to the country of India. They planned to travel to Goa and spend about 6 months exploring the country. They chose Goa because her boyfriend Rob had been there many times before. Fiona and her kids had never traveled out of Britain before, but they decided to just take the leap and go for it. Now, how would she afford this, right? 6 months is a long time to pay for herself and 8 kids. Now, it was only going to be 8 kids because her eldest, Halloran, decided to stay back in Britain. So she ended up saving up for this trip. She sold a pony and then she saved up her benefits, about £100 a week, to fund this 6-month vacation. So Fiona, Rob, and the 8 kids all set off for Goa in November 2007. And I said 2008 before, but it was 2007. Their first destination was Anjuna in Goa. So Anjuna is a laid-back coastal village in Goa and among the most famous beaches in India. Anjuna is known for its hippie culture and many tourists flock here yearly. So I haven't been there in a really long time, but apparently now it's really known for its trance parties on the beaches, as well as this famous flea market that takes place on Wednesdays. It's a major shopping hangout on the beach. It has so many stalls selling jewelry, fruits, clothes, weed, and so many other random things. Fiona, Rob, and the kids loved it there. They could take long walks on the beach and watch the sunset. In early February 2008, Rob and Fiona had enough of Anjuna and they wanted to explore other parts, namely Karnataka. That town was a 5 to 8 hour drive away, a 13-hour bus ride, or a 15-hour train ride. But Scarlett, she did not want to leave Anjuna. She was having a great time and she had met someone. In Anjuna, she met a man named Giulio Lobo, and he was a local tour guide. They became friends quickly, and Scarlett would hand out flyers for him, and in return, he allowed her to come on trips with him as a tour guide. Scarlett wanted to stay with Giulio. Fiona was pretty reluctant, but Scarlett managed to convince her that she would be okay staying back in Anjuna with Giulio. So Fiona agreed. Now, Scarlett was only 15, so I think a lot of us would be pretty shocked that Fiona would agree to letting her 15-year-old daughter stay back in a foreign country with practically a stranger. But like I said, Fiona was very laid back in her parenting. She had a very laid back approach and she trusted Scarlett. But the problem with the entire situation is, do you trust the people surrounding Scarlett? So following this, Fiona, Rob, and the remaining 7 kids, they traveled to a town called Gokarna. And this town was even more laid back, but it was more sacred. It was a peaceful town. Now, Scarlett would join her family in this new town sometime in early February 2008. I couldn't find the exact timeline, but soon she would tell her mom that she wanted to go back to Anjuna because there was a Valentine's Day party at a place called Curly's on February 14th that she wanted to attend. And Fiona again was reluctant, but she agreed. Now, it seemed like their bad luck was just beginning because back at home, her eldest son, Halloran, he got into a bad accident. He was crossing a road, I believe, and he was knocked down and hit by a car, and his injuries were so severe that they became life-threatening. Fiona was informed, and then a few days later, On February 17th, she phones Scarlett and she lets her know about her brother's accident. She told Scarlett that they would now need to make plans to return home to be with Halloran. While Fiona was worried about Halloran, she didn't know that that phone call would be the last time she would ever speak with her daughter Scarlett again. So Scarlett's life in Anjuna while she was alone during the day consisted of handing out flyers, going on tours with Julio, and even serving food at some beach shacks in exchange for money. And at night, she partied. I have to say, as a 15-year-old, she was pretty confident in being alone because I just don't think I would be comfortable being alone at 15 without my parents. Goa is a very busy place. It's always on, it's always a party, and things would only wind down at like 3, 4, 5 a.m. if I remember correctly. And by that time, 4, 5, 6 a.m., the people are now setting up market stalls for like the morning shopping. Fishermen are bringing their fish in. You know what I mean? Like, it kind of never ends. Nobody ever sleeps. And I'm saying that in comparison to living in a Western country. And the last time I went to Goa was like 10 years ago. So things could have changed. But living in a Western country, things close, at like 5 p.m. It's like, bye. Nobody cares about what you want to do. It's like, we're going home to our families. Like, that's normal. I find that, yes, in Australia, there are places that do stay open later, but it's not like India. India, everything's always open. And I think that's because people really need to make money over there. We're, pretty privileged in a Western country to be able to shut off our businesses at 5 p.m. So now that I live in a Western country, just thinking about my time in Goa on holiday, it seemed like anything was possible there. So quick story time just to give you guys an idea of what it's like. The entire beach comes alive at night. There's like so many shacks on the beach, and it's not like a little shack with like one person behind the counter. No, it's like full on restaurants, karaoke bars, clubs. It's like temporarily built places. It's always lively. And when I visited Goa, I went with my family and my cousin came down to join us. I remember we were on the beach and we wanted some drinks. So my cousin calls this random guy over and he's like, blah, blah, blah. He like tells him something. And then 10 minutes later, this same guy comes back with 2 other guys, but this time he has a bottle, like a brand new bottle of rum, glasses, and some soft drinks. And I was like, where did you come from? And it's just like, you want it? You got it. Then later on at about 3 a.m., we were driving back to my dad's friend's house where we were spending the night. I can't remember the exact details, but from where we were, maybe it was like a 30, 40-minute drive at 3 a.m. back to this guy's house. And to save time, my dad's friend, he like drives up to this dock by the water. And there's this big ferry docked by the water. And there are these guys, and I think some of them are even sleeping on this ferry. My dad's friend, he goes up, he talks to this guy. Next thing you know, he starts driving the car onto this ferry. And I'm like, what? We sail 10 minutes across the river. We drive off. And then we're like there at this guy's house. It was wild. Like I was like, you could never do that. Especially in Australia, there's no chance. So that's what I mean by, you can do whatever you want in a way. If you've got money, normally you can get things done. And it's just like that in some countries. Not everybody really follows the rules. And in certain countries, people really aren't afraid of the law, of the police, because they really know you can either bribe them or the police really aren't going to do much about the crime because there's so much crime. So back to Scarlett. I don't know exactly where she lived, but it was probably on Anjuna Beach. She did live with Julio. And Scarlett was an attractive young girl, and I'm sure she caught many men's eyes. So later on February 17th, 2008, the same day that Fiona called Scarlett and told her about Halloran's accident, Scarlett knew that her time in Goa was coming to an end, so she wanted to go out that night. Julio wasn't feeling that well, so he decided to stay at home. And Scarlett and her 16-year-old friend Ruby decided to just go out for one last night on the town. Scarlett would be heading back to England soon, and she wanted to just enjoy her last days in Goa. Ruby would later say that she actually wasn't planning to go out that night, but Scarlett talked her into it. She also made a statement saying, Scarlett suddenly blurted out that she was sleeping with Julio. He had a motorbike and used to buy her food and drinks. I was shocked. I had no idea they were having a relationship. I thought they were just friends. Now, as you and I both know, it's probably very unlikely that a guy would be willing to just take care of this 15-year-old girl for free. And Julio was like 25 years old, so he was definitely getting something out of it, and that was Scarlett. And don't come for me, but from my own experience, I feel like the guys in India and other countries don't really care about your age. Like in Australia, if you tell a guy that you're 16 and he's 25, he's going to be like, oh shit, he's going to think about the law aspect of it. But over there, they're like, and? So anyway, Ruby and Scarlett, as they headed into town, they bought a couple of Bacardi breezers from a shop near Ruby's home, and they drank it on their way to a bar called 9 Bar. They left that bar pretty quickly because it was empty, and they moved onto a beach bar. Over here, they drank 2 to 3 more Bacardi breezes, 1 to 2 beers, and tequila shots. They were quite drunk by the end of the night, and they took a taxi back to Ruby's place. Scarlett stayed at Ruby's place for just a few minutes before they said goodbye to each other, and they promised that they would keep in touch. Scarlett left Ruby's place at about 1 a.m., and Ruby claims that the two of them did not do any drugs that night, but that Scarlett was known to smoke weed all day and she was often stoned. The next day, early on February 18th, 2008, Scarlett's semi-naked body was found on Anjuna Beach. She was dead. Fiona was informed about Scarlett's death and she immediately traveled back to Anjuna. So during the initial police investigation, the police claimed that Scarlett's death was due to accidental drowning, that she was found floating in the water and no signs of violence were found on her body, and they essentially just closed the case. So what they were trying to claim was that, perhaps she got too drunk, fell asleep on the beach, and then drowned. But Fiona insisted that a second autopsy be conducted on Scarlett, and she would spend the next 4 weeks fighting for this case to be reinvestigated. Soon after, Fiona visited the morgue where Scarlett's body was being held, and she took pictures of Scarlett's body. Despite what the police had said about Scarlett's body being found with no marks or bruises, Fiona discovered many marks and bruises on her daughter's body, including extensive bruising to her genital area. Fiona refused to believe the police's conclusion that Scarlett had died from accidental drowning. Fiona just knew that it was not an accident, that her daughter did not just drown accidentally. And while the second autopsy was finally being conducted, Fiona went out and interviewed several witnesses from the night. Together with this, Fiona went out looking for any evidence she could find, and she did find some. Surprisingly, the police did not find this. Her daughter's discarded underwear, shorts, and sandals. And they were just found nearby in the bushes on the beach. Finally, on 2nd March 2008, the second autopsy was conducted, and it showed drugs in Scarlett's system, together with 50 cuts and bruises and injuries to her pelvic area. Evidence of a sexual assault. The water that was also found in Scarlett's lungs was found to be too little to cause drowning. The toxicology report also showed that there was ecstasy, cocaine, and LSD found in Scarlett's body. And then after this second autopsy was conducted, the case was then treated as a homicide. Prior to these finds, witnesses provided their accounts of what happened that night. What happened in the hours after Scarlett left Ruby's place are unaccounted for and unclear, but a witness named Mike, who was originally from London and had at the time been traveling to India, particularly Goa, for over 13 years, provided his account of what he saw that night. He stated that he was having a drink over at Louis' Beach Shack when he claimed that he had seen Scarlett fall over at the front of the beach bar at around 3 a.m. The owner of the bar, his name was Louis Catino, he came forward and helped Scarlett into the restaurant as she was having trouble walking properly because she was that intoxicated. He noticed she was completely drunk, talking gibberish, and I'm guessing men were approaching her, and he told them to stay away from her because she was clearly very young. So as she entered the bar, she proceeded onto the back kitchen area of the bar, and over here she met two Indian men, and she stayed for an hour with them and was taking cocaine with these men. When Scarlett finally approached Mike and began talking to him, she told him she was also from England and she was 15 years old. She then tells him that she had taken 3 drops of LSD, 2 ecstasy pills, as well as cocaine. But Michael did not see anyone actually give Scarlett the drugs. Now, Goa is known for its party life, especially the beach shacks. Many police officers view Anjuna Beach as unsuitable and unsafe, especially for family holidays. In recent years, the area has faced increasing threats from violent drug gangs, the Russian mafia, and pedophiles. Most of the hotels and shacks there also support the peddling of drugs. Combine that with the never-ending flow of alcohol, it's just not a good mix. Mike then sees Scarlett leave the bar with an Indian man. Now, Mike was also obviously partaking in the lawlessness that Anjuna Beach had to offer, and he left the bar shortly after Scarlett did. As Mike was leaving, he sees the man that Scarlett had originally left with riding away on his scooter. And then as he enters the car park, he sees Scarlett lying on the ground with another man on top of her. Now, at first, he kind of shouted at them, but he didn't really intervene because Scarlett was not protesting or screaming, and Mike then left the scene. A day after the autopsy was conducted on 2nd March 2008, on 3rd March, 2 men were arrested. 28-year-old Samson D'Souza, who worked as a bartender at Louis Beach Shack, and 39-year-old Placido Carvalho. On June 5th, 2008, the case was then taken over by the Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI. The CBI booked the 2 men on the following charges: culpable homicide not amounting to murder, sexual assault, drugging, sexual abuse of a child, and the destruction of evidence. Delays in the children's court process in Goa only saw the trial commence 2 years later in March 2010. India is notorious for its sluggish legal system, by the way. There were also 72 witnesses to be called in the case, and the prosecutor who was assigned to the case then resigned just a few days before the trial, causing further delays. The 2 men were identified as being the men last seen with Scarlett at Louis Beach Shack on the night of the murder. Scarlett was found dead just a few hours after being seen with these men. Both Samson and Placido denied all the charges. By 2013, 30 witnesses were called to the stand, and it was really hard to get a clear timeline of events, but basically one of the key witnesses, the English tourist named Mike, so he was one of the witnesses who could clearly put these 2 men with a clearly inebriated Scarlett on the night of the murder. But in April of 2012, he declined to return to Goa to testify in the case. Mike later told the BBC that he was scared to come back to Goa and proceed with his statement in the trial because he had heard rumors that threats were being made against him for what he saw that night. Following this, his statements were scrapped as inadmissible. Scarlett's mom, Fiona, described Mike as being a despicable coward for not returning to give evidence, and she said, "He let Scarlett down for the first time when he drove off and left her there with these men, and he just let her down again badly," referring to him not testifying in the trial. The CBI even traveled to the UK to record Mike's statement via video conferencing, but for some reason that didn't work out. Then Scarlett's diary was brought into evidence and revealed that she was deeply upset during her time in Anjuna Beach, and she had written, "I'm stuck and I want to go home." And she had also doodled like a hangman. So since the defense had already proclaimed their innocence, they now tried to use Scarlett's diary entries against her, hinting at the possibility that she may have considered committing suicide. The case dragged on for 8 years, delayed by frequent changes in judges and prosecutors. At that time, Fiona had to endure crude coverage of her entire life, of her daughter's drug use and sex life, and face scrutiny of her own lifestyle and her decision to allow her 15-year-old daughter to travel to Anjuna alone while she went off gallivanting with her new boyfriend and her other kids. But Fiona stood tall. She said, "There's never been any justice for a tourist murdered in this country. The attitude is, if you go out at night wearing shorts, you deserve to be raped and murdered." Then, on September 23rd, 2016, the verdict was in. The Children's Court acquitted Sampson and Besitos due to lack of evidence. Fiona had traveled to Goa for the verdict and was devastated at the court's decision. After years of delays, the verdict was not guilty, not even for supplying Scarlett with the drugs, an underage girl. And Fiona accused the police of corruption and pledged to take this case to a higher court. She pledged to continue fighting for justice for her daughter Scarlett. After the judgment was made, Placido Carvalho stated, "There was nothing in this case. We were being framed." Then Sampson's defense lawyer, Marvin D'Souza, stated, "There was no evidence against my client from the beginning. The CBI were just going ahead without any evidence. If the CBI decide to take the matter up to the High Court, we will see what legal options we have." Then Fiona's lawyer, Vikram Varma, stated, "It is for the CBI to decide. Facts are that the medical evidence talks of 52 injuries. Coke, eyewitness, and forensic supports this. But according to the verdict, no one killed her, hurt her, or gave her cocaine. The job of the investigation agency is to find out who has done it and to present evidence to support their case. The present criminal justice system has failed." Can you imagine what that would feel like? You know when in your gut you know that someone is guilty, and then being in a foreign country where you feel like you have no rights must have been really difficult. Fiona had to wait 4 years to bury her daughter, and Scarlett was finally laid to rest in June 2012 in a garden in the family's home in Devon. Then, surprisingly, a few months later, just when all hope was lost, in February 2017, the CBI challenged the Children's Court judgment and appealed to the High Court. So basically, the CBI's petition for the appeal stated that the judge in the Children's Court acquitted the men despite not having applied her judicial mind on both points of law and on facts of the case. The CBI also stated that the judge had wrongly concluded that there was a delay in recording witness statements, i.e. mics, and therefore dismissed them. The prosecutor, Ijaz Khan, sought the maximum sentence for both the accused men, hoping it would serve as a deterrent to other criminals. The CBI built a case that between 3:30 a.m. to 5:30 a.m. at Louis Beach Shack, both Sampson and Besitos made Scarlett, a 15-year-old girl, consume cocaine, ecstasy tablets, and beer, knowing full well that she was already very intoxicated. And they did all this with the intention of sexually assaulting her. The CBI also charged Sampson for deliberately leaving Scarlett near the waterline on the beach, knowing full well she was extremely intoxicated and may drown. Scarlett was left unconscious by the water, where she did eventually drown and die. Another witness named Murli Sagar, who was a waiter at Louis Beach Shack, came forward and stated that he saw Scarlett arrive at Louis Beach Shack at about 3 a.m. that night. She was apparently clearly drunk and looking for a ride back to Julio Lobo's place. He testified that upon entering the bar, Scarlett then went to the back into the kitchen where she joined Besitos and Sampson. All three of them then proceeded to take cocaine. After she emerged from the kitchen, Murli then agreed to drive Scarlett back home at about 5 a.m. He then says that as they were leaving the bar, he was then approached by Sampson, who took charge of Scarlett and then told Murli to leave them alone. He claims that Scarlett was being held up by Samson because she was in no position to stand alone. He says at the time, Scarlett was wearing a sports bra and a pair of shorts, and claims that she seemed comfortable with Samson. Then after leaving the bar, Samson and Scarlett were joined by Placido, and they all went and sat on the beach. Scarlett was talking about the stars and singing and wanted music to be played. And this was huge for the case because it gave an idea of how Scarlett spent her last few hours, as previously this was unreported. Murley then claims that Samson promised to drive Scarlett home that night. He then said that before he left and went home, he spent the last few minutes looking for one of Scarlett's sandals because it was missing, and Samson had requested him to do so. Morley looked for her sandal, but he couldn't find it, and that's when he left and drove home on his scooter. And that was what Mike had seen, Morley leaving the scene. Morley also testified that Placido, who was locally known as Shana Boy, used to bring a large quantity of cocaine to the bar. It was then reportedly distributed to Samson, who would then go ahead and sell it. Then Louis, who was the owner of Louis' Beach Shack, and then to another drug dealer. Apart from cocaine, Louis' Beach Shack was known to deal in hash and ecstasy as well. After Morley's testimony, Mike, the English tourist, finally testified as well. And I also read that Mike had reportedly stayed with Samson on and off during his trips to Goa, so I can understand why he didn't want to testify against him. Morley, together with Mike's testimony, basically extensively exposed the entire drug nexus at Louis' Beach Shack, as well as the surrounding beaches. But none of the law enforcement agencies had tried to further probe these drug connections to find out more, to stop it. Samson's lawyer tried to proclaim his innocence and even tried to deny his presence at the scene despite the numerous witness accounts. They claimed that Samson and Placido were just targets and that Scarlett was clearly intoxicated through her own will, and that her behavior that night and in general in Goa was not like that of a normal girl in India, and that the entire situation was just a horrible accident. They claimed there was no way to prove that Samson and Placido forced Scarlett to take the drugs, and that the forensic examinations showed no abnormality in her brain, her skull, vagina, and her heart, which proves that there was no altercation that occurred during her death, further lending to the theory that this was all an accident. But Fiona, together with the prosecution, did not agree with this. The medical evidence, the 50+ bruises, the marks on her body, the concoction of drugs, the witness statements, all led to the fact that Scarlett was grievously raped and murdered. Then, finally, on July 19th, 2019, the High Court of Bombay found Samson D'Souza guilty on all 5 counts, which were culpable homicide not amounting to murder, sexual assault, administering a stupefying substance, drugging a child, abusing a child, and causing the disappearance of evidence. On the other hand, Placido Carvalho, who was charged with abetting these offenses, was found not guilty and acquitted. Samson was sentenced to just 10 years for the murder of Scarlett Keeling. Fiona was finally happy that things had come to an end after 11 years of fighting. She said, "Even if it's 10 years, I feel it's not enough, but I'll be happy with second best. It should be life. Death is too nice for them." Fiona really suffered quite a bit during that decade because she faced a lot of scrutiny and judgment for her actions, her decisions, for her parenting. She also had to deal with facing jail after admitting to benefit fraud in 2010. She admitted to falsely claiming £19,000 in income support between February 2005 and March 2008, and she was given an 8-month suspended jail term and ordered to repay all of the debt. Then on top of this, having to deal with the murder of her daughter, I also want to pop in and mention here that after recording this, I found an interview that Rob, Fiona's boyfriend, gave regarding the entire situation. The article basically went against Fiona, and Rob says that Fiona has portrayed herself in a false light. He shared pics of Fiona smoking weed, that Scarlett smoked weed right in front of her young siblings, how Fiona wasn't a very good mom and let Scarlett do anything. Rob says that they used up their money on drugs and alcohol by month 2 in Goa. They were surviving on a bowl of rice per day. He also went on to say that Scarlett, during her time in Karnataka with the family, was not wanting to go back with Giulio, but that Giulio came to take Scarlett back with him, and Scarlett did go back with him and ended up dead a few days later. He condemned Fiona for allowing Scarlett to go back with Giulio. There were also claims that Scarlett and Giulio were going to Finland on a vacation, but in reality, Giulio was probably planning to use Scarlett as a drug mule. I'll leave the article linked below if you guys want to read it. I know a lot of judgments can be made on her. You know, most of us probably wouldn't leave our child alone in a foreign country, but we don't know their situation. Fiona claims that she only learned of the sexual relationship between Giulio and Scarlett later on. And by the way, Giulio, he never faced any charges. But Fiona did make a few statements saying that she was probably too naive and trusting of the people surrounding Scarlett, these people who claimed to be her friends. But she doesn't think that she was negligent in any other way. She said, "Mostly people don't know the facts when they say I left her on the beach on her own or with her 29-year-old boyfriend. He wasn't her boyfriend and I didn't leave her on her own. They don't know the facts and I try to not take what they say personally. I have got to live with that, but I did not murder her. It's not my fault. I did not murder her." It's pretty sick to blame Fiona for her own daughter's death or to condone the police's gross mishandling of the investigation. But in some foreign countries, especially with such a vast population and so many poor people, the crimes are just overwhelming. It's not to excuse the police's actions or the laziness that does occur, but the fact that they even appealed the children's court decision says something. I feel like normally they'd probably just be like, oh, well, that's the decision. Like, you know, too bad. It's such a sad case. And when I was researching this, there's like tons of tourist murders in Goa. And, you know, like I said, it's a poorer country and tourists are just seen as having more money, and it probably is a greed motivation. But the fact that Goa has become such a drug city, and traveling there, you probably wouldn't be able to tell unless you are, you know, out at night during these parties on the beaches, unless you're immersed in it, because I really had no clue. And I'm like from there. Scarlett probably was just having the time of her life. I mean, she was young, naive, and honestly, she was just unaware. You never think something bad is going to happen to you, especially when you're young and doing these things. Rest in peace to Scarlett. And let me know your thoughts on today's case down below, guys. And I will see you in the comments. Besitos. Bye.